Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 14. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
My name is Dr. Rachel Crellin, and I'm an Associate Professor of Archaeology from the University of Leicester, from the School of Archaeology and Ancient History.
Rachel, welcome to the podcast series. You are very carefully handling an object. What is it?
I have got an amazing strip of Bronze Age gold in front of me. So it's small. I've got small hands and it fits right in the palm of my hand. It is probably less than 1 centimetre wide and it's maybe 3 centimetres long. And it's this gold strip. And on one surface of it, it has these long lines that are sunken into the surface of it. But if I turn it over in my hand, the other side doesn't really have that same form of decoration. And it's broken. So both ends of the strip have ragged tears to them. One that's very, very ragged and unusual in shape, and the other one's a little bit smoother. And then when you look at the surface of the object, you can tell that it's previously been folded. So the two bits that are now the ends of it have been folded inwards. So my guess, because I don't know for certain, is that when it was deposited in the ground thousands of years ago, it was folded up into one small piece, and we've seen it unfolded when it's come out of the ground, and that's why we've got these creases in the surface of it we can see now.
The creases weren't put there deliberately. The creases arrived as a facet of this object's life then.
So yeah, the linear lines on the surface, the decoration is deliberate, but the lines that cut across this, that go across the width of it, are, I would say, from it being folded over and folded up to make it smaller. So you can see like the tiniest kind of hairline fracture on one side that goes with the fold, and then the other fold is a little bit better in terms of like it's not got too much of a tear. And then the ends of it have both been broken off. So it's been torn from a bigger object and then folded up before it was deposited in the ground.
This isn't the only object in the exhibition which is golden. People get very excited about gold. What era are we talking about in terms of this gold being worked?
So this comes from the Bronze Age, and that's when we first get gold working in Britain and Ireland. And people begin to make mostly very flat objects from gold. So they're taking small amounts of gold and they are hammering and working it, probably actually with stone tools. So a whole toolkit of small stones of different colours and textures that are polished and really well worked to allow you to hammer and shape these small flat gold objects. The first ones come at the very beginning of the early Bronze Age, and they're making large necklaces that we call lunulae. They're kind of like flat sheets shaped like a moon, and they work sometimes gold discs in that same kind of thing, and then sometimes gold objects that are kind of placed as a sheet covering over an internal core. Sometimes both the core and the sheet bit are both decorated to match. The core bit is sometimes made out of, we've examples of wood, we've examples of jet, we've examples of clay as well. So all kinds of different materials that then get associated with the gold.
So this item, it looks as though it's been through a fairly tough life. You talked about it being ripped from something.
Yep.
And yet the working of it requires craftsmanship. It is a craftsmanship piece of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the lines that are incised on the surface of it, there are a lot of them, and they are spaced at pretty much, I'm going to guess, I've not got my measuring tools with me, I'm going to guess they're about 1 millimetre. I'm not the worst sighted person in the world, but if I remove my glasses and look at it, I think I stand no chance of being able to execute this decoration in any kind of level of skill at all. So you've got to think about somebody with really fine motor control, with really fine and well-kept tools that are going to be able to do it. And then they've got to be in good light conditions too, right, to be able to produce this. Some interpretations have even suggested that some of the gold working might well have been done by younger people because their eyes are often better. Now, that's very difficult to prove, and I'm not really sure I completely agree with that, but it's worth thinking about in a world without glasses. It's really hard for us to talk about who metal workers were in this period of the past. So we think probably not everybody was a gold worker. We think it's a small subset of people. We might wonder whether they were treated very differently for their kind of incredible craftsmanship that they show in the production of these objects, and what kind of a different type of life they might have led by kind of being so travelling around and meeting different people.
I said that people get excited about gold. Gold is often associated with status. Was it the same in the Bronze Age?
That's a really tricky thing, because for kind of the hundreds of years that we've done archaeology, we often assume that gold is high status, right? We make that same assumption. It's the same today as it was then. Burials that have gold in them are few and far between. And then many gold deposits are actually without a burial at all, so they're not associated with an individual. That makes you wonder about who that gold is associated with. So the reason I think that this has been folded up is that we see this as a real kind of a frequent feature of this kind of archaeology. They take the objects, they fold them up, and they bury them somewhere in the ground. And if we're trying to think about who is doing that, it's probably not one person, it's probably a community of people who are doing it. And they're not trying to associate themselves necessarily with this object. So some of the kinds of gold objects we get outside of burial contexts, we might wonder if they're community objects that are held by a group of people, so less associated with an elite status of somebody who's like really powerful, and instead associated with a community doing something together. But on the other hand, we do have burials associated with gold objects where we have to try and work out what that's telling us about that person. Some of those burials are just really weird. So one way of thinking about this is not that these people are kind of like super powerful elites equivalent to, you know, kings or queens or chiefs or whatever, but instead kind of people who are a bit out of the ordinary in some way that have had access to this material and the association with it. So lots of the burials in the area around Stonehenge have gold objects included in them.
In the Bronze Age, you couldn't have put a value on gold in the same way as we do now. There was no such thing as the gold standard, for instance.
Yep.
How commonplace was gold in communities in England in the Bronze Age?
Yeah, that's quite a hard question to answer. So we get some in burials at the beginning of the early Bronze Age, and there are burials from across Britain that have small amounts of gold in them. They're not super common. I've never excavated a burial with a gold object in it, so that gives you some sense. But they're not super rare either. So you've got this here in Northants, and you've got that kind of association with it, and, you know, you've not got Stonehenge next door here. And we also get it deposited as an individual object or with other objects in what we refer to as hoards, these depositions that aren't associated with bodies or necessarily even with sites, but instead are placed in the ground. And we think about those as kind of filling some kind of ritual purpose. And again, they're kind of scattered across Britain. So it's not that everybody necessarily has access to this material, but it's also not super, super rare. My guess is that most people in their lifetime saw a gold object in the Bronze Age and came into some contact with it. But that's a really hard thing to prove.
So this particular item, Rachel, a fragment, though it may be, what does it tell us about Northamptonshire? What does it tell us about Northamptonshire communities and perhaps the sophistication of people who might have come into the area as part of Northamptonshire, bringing their wares and their skills with them?
So it shows how well connected Northamptonshire is to everywhere else in Britain. I think often when we imagine the Bronze Age or the Neolithic period of the past thousands of years ago, we assume that people maybe stayed still. But we know from the evidence that we get from osteological analyses and isotopic work on skeletons that people are actually moving around loads. Sometimes they're moving small distances back and forth in their lifetime. Sometimes they're moving much further distances. And as a result of this kind of high degree of movement in this period, Northamptonshire is as connected to what's going on elsewhere as other bits of Britain are. So it really places it within the rest of that story, if you like. It shows its connection to gold workers who are making gold. It shows its connection to other places for the tools that you'd need to make it. And Where exactly gold comes from in the Bronze Age is still a little bit of a bone of contention, but it shows you the connection to that network that's moving materials around Britain and Ireland at this point in time. So the county of Northamptonshire does not exist in the Bronze Age, but it's clearly the area we call that today is a part of that story. It's no different in one sense from the surrounding area.
And one final question. Yeah. When we get excited about gold, we often get excited about the quality of the gold. Could this be Welsh gold? Is it known whether that is Welsh gold? And what do we know about the purity of the gold for those that are interested in value?
So this one's really tricky to answer, in particular because I work with a specialist who tries to identify where gold has come from. We know that there's gold in Ireland, we know that there's gold in Wales, and we know that there's gold in Cornwall. But actually, scientifically, saying that it's from one of those places is really, really difficult. And there have been lots of different attempts to do it. It's most likely that it's come from one of those three areas, but more than that, we cannot say based on kind of the current scientific techniques that we have at our disposal. Get me back in 20 years and maybe we can answer that question. But it shows that connection to those other places. And all of those places are really interesting. So if we go to Cornwall in the early Bronze Age, that's where the tin is coming from to make bronze. And it's possible that the kind of hunt for tin in the early Bronze Age is what brings people into contact with Cornish gold for the first time. If we go to Ireland, that's where the copper is coming from at that point in time. And then if we travel to Wales, from the middle of the Bronze Age onwards, copper is coming out of Wales as well. So these are kind of connected and networked places. So it's a period when these aren't people who are in isolation. They're people who move around and connect into these bigger networks that move materials through Britain through the course of the Bronze Age.
And with what is now Northamptonshire, but wouldn't have been in the Bronze Age, we're right at the crossroads of traffic and travel. It's one of the boasts of this county, one way and another, and it seems to date from Bronze Age times with things like the yellow gold and the piece that you are holding in your hand right now, and of course, which is visible in the exhibition. Rachel, thank you.
No worries, this was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.